in this analytics space, like helping businesses get this set up and everything, a lot of times where I'll start is like, what are those business questions you're trying to answer? Like, don't just capture the data just to capture it, right? So sit down and try to understand like what am I trying to get a user to do when they hit the site? What are those events that you want to be tracking and doing with that information? And so if you don't have that question, then you don't need to capture the data necessarily.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a Ninja Cat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. Steve Lamar is a consultant specializing in Google Analytics for implementation, training, and workshops. Steve has worked every possible job in marketing, including analyst, account director, SEO manager, and also is founder and CEO of Promo Prep, a marketing calendar and promotion management platform. He's an informative delight to follow on LinkedIn, and he's here today to talk about the new era of Google Analytics. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate it.
So glad you're here. And I know people are just like super grateful because a lot of people have been pulling their hair out here since, I guess, July.
Yeah,
They
right.
made this switch from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics. And I just wanted to start with, why did they do that? What, like, do you know the provenance of this decision? Like, what's going on? Like, can you kind of set the tone here? Why did they switch? Why did they
Yeah.
take it away from
Well,
us, Steve?
I know, right. I guess the way that I see it, obviously I haven't heard directly from Google on this, but Universal Analytics has been around for a long time, right? So it was what, early mid 2000s. Even before that, they bought a tool called Urchin, and like it's just the web is very different back then than it is now.
Mhm.
And they also, at one point, I don't know when, but they bought another tool called Firebase, which is kind of more on the app side.
Mm.
And that's really where GA4 came from, right? So they basically modified Firebase. It was Firebase Analytics, and they modified that to GA4 and kind of rebranded it and everything else. And so it was very app focused, right? It was very focused on people tapping and on their phones and on mobile apps primarily. And so that was kind of the infrastructure underneath it, and that's why they kind of translated that into and brought it back into like the web space as well.
Mm.
So I don't know. I somewhat see that fundamentally as some of where some of the issues are,
Mm.
in terms of how data gets tracked in a certain way. But I think even with that, like the foundational piece of it, I feel like they could have done a lot better job, like with the actual reporting. Because at the end of the day, that's what people care about. Like in
Uh-huh.
UA, everybody's so used to it. You get in there, you can go find what you need relatively quickly. Like you're kind of used to where you go. So there is a little bit of I'm it's new, so it's hard, but it's also like I have to build things myself. I have to like do some work to get to the same data I had before. I think that's the biggest issue. Is like they're Google products, but they're completely different. But still, people see them as Google products, and they're still called Google Analytics, and so they expect to kind of get the same things out of them. That's really where I find a lot of folks, have the biggest issues. Is like, how do I get to the same stuff I had before?
Right. And you're just so used to those things. It's muscle
Yes,
memory. But as
yeah,
we were
totally.
talking, marketers are encouraged to use the new tech. Our MarTech stacks are Jenga toppled ready because of this. Where
Yeah.
you're supposed to take on these things, but it's hard because you have such a huge preference for what happened before. So explaining that is really cool. Like hearing that the mobile preference for Firebase was some of the things that maybe leading to the frustrations we have. But
Hmm.
UA, we knew what our meaningful and impactful metrics were. They're to your taste, but they're available. But in GA4, it seems like people are having a bit of a more troubling time finding what those impactful metrics are. So, in your opinion, what are those meaningful and impactful metrics in GA4?
Yeah, right. Every business is different, right? So you've got so many different types of websites out there. Some could be B2B or e-com, like B2C type stuff, D2C, all those. And so it really depends on what you're looking at from a business and what kind of insights you're trying to glean. So I think, at the core of it, everybody wants to understand how many visits or sessions are coming to the site, what kind of pages are they viewing, and what do they do? Did they fill out a form? Did they download something? Did they make a purchase? So
Right.
all that fundamental piece of it, that's still there, right? That's still part of GA. It's a little different in the back end how you set these things up, and then also how you get at that data in the reporting. But all of that still is accessible in old GA and Universal Analytics and in GA4.
Hmm.
But really, like, one of those, like, what are those core metrics? It's
Right.
it's it's business to business, right? So I think if you have a lot of content on your site and you're really more interested in user engagement, maybe things like people watching videos, or they are interacting with certain widgets on the site or things like that. Those are the kind of things that you can set up, and you can pass that data over as events and say, all right, these user did these things. That's meaningful for me. And I can even mark this as a conversion and say, okay, they went so far as like converting in my world, whatever that is. So like
Mm.
if you're a B2B, it's like filling out that form, and like it's a sales form, or it's a downloading a white paper, those kind of things. So, and that's not really different than Universal Analytics. Like you could have done all those things and track those things. It just shows up a bit differently in GA4.
Right. It shows up a bit differently, but talk to a couple weeks ago we were talking about you posted on LinkedIn about this switch in between conversions and events that was taking place in GA4, and there was a lot of confusion, and you sort of threaded the
Mm.
needle. Explain what that conversion event dichotomy is.
Yeah, and that does cause some confusion, right? So think of an event as anything that happens on any action that's taken on a site. And I'm usually mostly talking websites. This could be on like mobile apps too, but for the most part, websites, right? So someone takes an action. And so the first action people take are they load the page. So the page loads, that triggers a page view. That's an event. Or if someone, maybe they click on a certain button that you've set up to track as an event because that's a really important button. Or they, like I said before, like fill out or watch a video, and depending on how long they watch it, those are events. So every single action that gets taken, they make a purchase. Those are all actions. So those turn into events. So you'll have this long list of events. And GA4 does do, it kind of captures some things automatically. So if you just set up GA4, don't do anything else to it, it'll track certain things automatically. But then if you really want to get more granular in it, you would then go through, typically through a tool like Google Tag Manager, where you can then get really granular with all those types of events you want to track, like adding products to cart, viewing a product in the e-com space, so things like that. So those are all those like actions that people are taking on the site. Then you have conversions. And so conversions are those really like key events that someone takes, like not necessarily the last thing they do, but really those moments that you really care about. So usually is like form submissions, making a purchase, things like that. So that's the distinction between events. You can have many events, and then usually just a handful of conversions. On some sites, only one conversion because you really care about that one thing. So you basically, when you have all these events, you can kind of toggle them on to be considered a conversion. And that's very different than, well, it's different than old GA, because old GA had goals, and they still had events. Like you could track events, but they had goals. And
Right.
so goals, I don't know, can be interpreted a little differently than a conversion. And they, like the LinkedIn post you mentioned, a couple of weeks ago, Google basically had a help article that they put out that said they're changing conversions and they're going to call it key events. And that like blew up in like the analytics space. Like, this is ridiculous. Like, that, why change it to key events? Like, it just adds more confusion to everything. So that was some of the, there's a lot of posting around that. They actually pulled that article down. I don't know if they're going to
No.
end up changing it to key events.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, it was like there was enough buzz, I think, that they're like, oh, we better. I don't know if they made a change in decision or they just pulled the help article down for now. We might see it in the future. But yeah, that was somewhat comical in the way that all happened.
It's so tough keeping up. I mean, and if you were in the
Yeah,
UA world, you knew. Here comes panda. Here comes parrot. Here comes whatever other
yeah,
random
yeah.
animal. The core updates, and so our world was shook, and so it behooved you to pay attention. And you're outlining a scenario in which they said something, and then we complained, and then they sort of like walked it back a bit,
Hmm.
and so it's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it almost kind of makes you wonder, we were so diehard on giving all of our attention and intention towards following Google best practices, towards understanding how the algorithm worked, towards understanding how we could get the analytics to our clients in report fashion. But now it seems like things are so up in the air. Maybe you don't have to pay attention to certain updates. I mean, like, what's your thoughts on just like staying on top of the Google updates? Do you need to?
Yeah.
What's your
Well,
thoughts there?
it so because GA4 is such a like new product,
Mm.
um, Universal had been around for so long, and it was pretty baked, right? They did make some changes, but they seemed to be slower, and they didn't have as much of an impact. Now there's changes happen a lot more frequently, and some very fundamental changes happen that could really kind of shifts how things even get reported. And so it is hard to keep up with. I have a hard time keeping up with it. And I'm in different forums and things that I, and Slack channels and things
Yep.
that I try to pay attention to it. But still, like I've got it's not only just saying, oh, this happened, but it's now like going deep on and trying to understand how's that going to actually impact things. And so it's a challenge. It's really hard to kind of keep up with the changes. And so I would expect there's any well, so old GA is still live for anyone paying for it, right? And anyone in GA 360, it's available up until July of next year. So that's still active on folks that are bigger brands and bigger companies that are paying for GA. But they're sunsetting that fully in July of next year.
Oh boy.
And so they definitely have made more of a shift in the GA4 space and making updates there. But I would expect that pace to continue for at least another year, where there's just constantly things that are happening and adjustments being made. So it's very much a fluid space right now.
It very much is. And it's tough because it's sold as the proof. Without the
Yeah,
proof,
yeah,
I can't secure new business. I can't make sure my
right.
current customers are happy. Like, damn it. I could see
Yeah,
some
yeah,
frustration.
yeah.
So, but that's good to hear from someone who is passionately following this, that it's hard to keep up, but the main remit is just figuring out how changes will impact use. So it isn't about following the shifts. It's just about understanding what the downstream effects of those shifts could be. So,
Exactly. Yep.
and it
Yep.
takes a village is what I'm hearing. So, speaking of,
Yeah.
you are so great about helping people bridge this gap from old GA to new. And there are those differences, and we talked about some of those. So, what strategies do you suggest for the audience here to help them bridge old data stories with the new data stories? Because if there are comparative jumps and things are called different things,
Yeah.
how do you what's your thoughts on giving them a way to bridge the old and new?
It's tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because foundationally GA4 tracks things differently. At the high level, it's pretty much the same, right? Like the way users are tracked, pretty much the same. The way sessions are tracked, pretty much the same. There's definitely some nuances there. The way, if you so at that high level, there's definitely some differences, but for the most part, you should be within like that 5% range. But core events, like when someone fills out a form again or purchase or things like that, that shouldn't be any different, right? Those are core events that get tracked. If the event gets captured, it's captured, right? So you really
Right.
shouldn't see any shifts there. Where you're going to see a shift is how that data is interpreted once it's captured. And so where we tend to see the biggest changes between the two systems are in how channels or your source of traffic, your attribution gets tracked. I've done some comparisons. Well, you'll see a gap between like paid search of 20-30% or direct of like 30-40%. Like the gaps there can be really, really large. And that's primarily because of how Google Analytics 4 not only kind of reworks attribution, but also how it tracks a session or a visit to the site. And so there's a kind of a combination of those two things, not to get too technical on it, but there's a combination of those two things, which leads to a big discrepancy between the two systems. It just fundamentally processes the data differently, and therefore you have these big gaps between, particularly at that source, medium / channel level.
Right. And so, like, say you got new channel activity, you got old channel activity. What's your thoughts? Is there a way to bridge this? You did post something
Yeah,
about year over year analysis,
yeah.
which was cool, but it also seemed super technical.
Yeah, yeah. So You can, and why I guess I've been approaching it is try to understand where those shifts are on at the channel level. And so I've created a couple like Looker Studio reports just for so people can kind of quickly look at the differences between this two systems, where they can say, all right, Universal Analytics is tracking this way, GA4 is now tracking this way. All right, generally speaking, I should expect to see my revenue down by like 5% or my conversions down by X. And then at the channel level, I could generally expect to see my paid search conversions down about 10%. It's not because it's actually performing differently. It's because the two systems track differently. So just understanding how those they track just at the metric level, then you can kind of interpret that back. That's one way to approach it. Or like if you and I guess that's important when you have businesses that really care about year over year, where you have seasonality changes and you're looking at the year over year. And I work a lot with e-com businesses, and they very much care about year over year.
Right.
And so that's really where we have to dig into that a bit more to really understand it. If your business doesn't care about year over year as much, or like, certainly everybody cares about trends, but like you can bring it into and not really be so focused about what Universal Analytics said before. Just focus on GA4 and like just get into that world and try to really understand how your data is being interpreted there, and not really try to compare the two systems, because it really does get pretty tricky.
That's scary that there's math involved. That's
yes, there's lots of math.
Well, I might be off by 5 or 10%, which
I know
is scary world for the marketer, because these are sold as accurate things. These are sold as truth.
Right.
So you have to be like, ooh, a little plus minus percentage there.
Yeah, well, and even to bring into that, you're with even more shifts to like privacy centric worlds where you have cookie consent, you have more people using ad blockers. GA has never been accurate. Like it just never has. You're never going to get a one-to-one to some other system. Like you're using a HubSpot and like any kind of CRM, you've got this data captured from this particular customer. Those numbers of the like form fills, they're never going to match to GA exactly. Right. There's going to be fall off from whatever those various things are. So I hate to say like it's always been directional, but it always kind of has been. It's just now a different directional piece we got to kind of figure out.
Wow. Directionality. Oh gosh.
Right. Yeah. Everybody likes precise and precision, but it's never quite there.
I know. But when the budgets are on the line, they're like, ooh, it's going to be plus or minus, you're fired.
Yeah.
You're like, ooh, 10% chance I'm fired? No, 100%.
Yeah. And it has a big impact on ROAS. And when you're looking at, your ad spend and things like that. So yeah, it has to have an impact.
But there's something dope that you say that it isn't the truth. It is a source of approximation. And let's approach it as such. And I do believe, and I mean, I'm guilty of this. Early on, I was like, show me what the UA says, because that's the truth. And you're like, well, I mean, is it?
Yeah.
It's like it's a part of the truth. It's a part of what they could capture of the truth. Is it reality? I'm not sure. Let's get back into this. Let's get into some heady stuff. Like if somebody is looking at GA4 and they're wondering, is it events? Is it key events? Is it those micro actions? Is it conversions? Like, what do you think the critical points of analysis are in GA4 that every agency should be focusing on? Once again, with the caveat, business is different. Everybody's unique.
Yes. Right. Well, I think like some of those like quote exciting things you can look at or more unusual things in a way are the events that happen in between the first visit and the actual like final thing that you're expecting or hoping someone does, like make a purchase or fill out a form or something. Right. So I don't know, some people use like micro conversions or micro events, like that, whatever. So it's something like maybe you do have content, maybe you have videos on your site. So it could be something like, does someone watch a video that you want them to be watching? Like maybe you have an ad on paid social on Facebook or something or Instagram, and you want them to kind of click through and get to this video, and you want them to watch that video. You can set it up so that you're able to then track, did they watch the video? How long did they watch that video? So really, there's lots of different ways to break down all of those in-between events that happen to really get close to how your site's performing. or how
Mm.
people are engaging with your site.
That's amazing. And one thing that I used to love in UA was the path exploration. So you could really figure out they went here, but I can look back and see what they've done. It's more difficult in GA4 to do that.
It is.
Is okay,
It
good. I
is.
was wondering because I was like, maybe I'm not computering good. Um,
Yeah, no. And honestly, I haven't found a great way to do this inside the interface. In Universal Analytics, there was basically just a report. It was a page path analysis. You can go to that and you kind of see,
Loved it.
yeah, right, the pathing and such. It doesn't quite work that well. There is one in the exploration section, which is kind of the custom area where you can create all these
Yes.
custom reports. But there isn't a great way to just like click a button and you just see all of it happen. You can build it out, but honestly, I haven't personally like really found it terribly useful in the way that the old one was.
Right. Maybe you could slide
Yeah,
that to me, and after this, I can maybe
yeah,
play around with it.
yeah.
But yeah, I
Well,
mean,
I would,
it's
and
custom reports.
I
Yeah.
it is. And I would say like this kind of takes it in a whole other realm, which Google is kind of pushing a lot more, is to get into BigQuery, right? And so BigQuery is Google's like database of where you can store all of this GA data, and all of it, gets stored there, and then you can create all these custom reports against all of that. And the benefit is that it's raw data, right? It's like the event level data. It's you can do it. It's not been like manipulated in any way, from like the way the UI does. And so, you can utilize that and really get really granular in how you report things out. It's very complex. It's very difficult to do. You need resources and people to be able to do it and know what they're doing there. So it's not something that like every company can just go out and start using,
Right.
unfortunately. So
Right.
yeah, so there's definitely some limitations there, but it just some of those things just aren't quite as accessible as they used to be in UI.
Right. Yeah. But I love your advice about looking in between the first action and your final desired action and see if people are getting what they want out of the site. Are they, where are they abandoning, those kind of things. If you can track that,
Yeah,
that's super great. And it all comes down to the performance. But I have a question here about do you think like the GA4 approach to tracking conversions is better than the one that was in UA, or is there some improvements in this area?
so how GA4 brings it back to the channel level, I think it does a better job. And so let me explain that a second, because it gets really confusing once you start getting into the attribution space and how GA4 does attribution. So one way that they track attribution is it's let's say a user comes to the site from paid search. They see it, they type in something, they click through, and then they're on the site, they're navigating around. And I'm going to use an ecom example. So they're on an ecom site, and right before they go to checkout, they want to go get a coupon code. Like we all do this, right? We go look for an affiliate site and we get a
Uh-huh.
coupon code, and we go back. So basically what's happening is you're starting on paid search, you're doing all your things, you're about ready to check out, and then you go off to an affiliate site, and then you come back to the site. You click on a link on the affiliate site, and it brings you back to the site. So what happens there is the first source of traffic that started your session, the visit to the site, is paid search. And then now mid session, like in between the users, like before the starting and checking out completely, they've now kind of changed the source of the traffic, because they went to this affiliate site and they came back, and then they go check out. Well, in old GA and Universal Analytics, if that source of traffic changes mid session, and in this case it would, like, started on paid search, went to affiliate, and now back. So the source of traffic changed now to affiliate. In old GA, the session would actually break and would start over. And so what would happen is when the conversion happened, when the purchase is made and that purchase event gets captured in old GA, all that credit would go to affiliate, even though paid search started that session. So the session breaks in the middle. And so since all that credit goes to affiliate tended to get a lot of credit if you use affiliates on your site. And so GA4 doesn't do this anymore. So what happens is if the session starts with paid search, and then even if anything happens mid-cycle or mid-session where the session, changes, the source changes to affiliate, once they go convert, the first source of that session gets credit. So a paid search would get credit for that instead of affiliate. And it would only count as one session. Whereas in Universal Analytics, it would be two sessions. So in sessions were actually being inflated in Universal Analytics in that scenario. And attribution was actually being given to kind of the wrong channel. Like it was being given to the channel that closed it, but not the one that started the session. So from that standpoint, I think GA4 does a better job of, number one, tracking session counts because it's not breaking it mid-cycle, and it's giving it attribution to the channel that actually started the session. So I think that's a bit better as well.
I was wondering if you have any like specific tips or tricks to ensure accurate conversion counts in GA4, such as avoiding multiple conversions within one session.
Yeah.
It seems like they've done some of that work, but what are like your tips and tricks for us, lowly marketers out here?
Yeah, there's a couple places. So inside the interface, and this is probably a couple months old at this point, or a couple months new anyway. So when as I was talking about before, you have all these events that you could be tracking, and then you can toggle them on and off to say if you want them to be a conversion or not. And so in the conversion section, in the admin section of GA4, in the conversion area, there's now a new option. It's like the triple dots. You click on that and it says, do you want to count this only one time per session or every time it happens in a session? And so this is pretty nice because for things like those particularly like someone filling out a form, right, and submitting a form, that can happen and can cause, depending on how it's being tracked, like if it's tracked when the page loads, like the confirmation page loads for the form fill, or some people track it when they click on the button for submit, which isn't the best thing to do, but some people do that. So there's this option now to say, on this particular conversion, only track it one time per session. Don't track it if it happens multiple times. So that's the easiest thing, and that's the easiest way to do it. It's just a button click. So yeah, that's one way. Another way is if you're using Google Tag Manager, which again, I definitely recommend if you're trying to get real granular on what you're trying to track. Inside Google Tag Manager, there's things to do to keep it from firing multiple times, the event from firing multiple times. And then at that point, GA4 just never even sees it on the second, third, fourth time. So there's ways around that. So that's kind of GTM world. But in the GA4 world, yeah, they do have that option to just turn it off.
My gosh. And it isn't just here. It's in the Search Console. It's in the Tag Manager. It's in the Signals. It's in 360. It's in there. You're like, we are in Google's world.
Yeah, yes, all over.
But I love it. Bouncing around, knowing what you're doing, that's key. And it will pay back in multiples if you can get this right. So speaking straight on telling a data story with GA4 metrics, how would you advise businesses they retell their data story in this new platform rather than trying to directly replace their UA data story?
I think it could be a good opportunity for businesses just to kind of reassess what kind of data and what kind of stories, what kind of insights they're trying to glean out of getting the data. In this analytics space, like helping businesses get this set up and everything, a lot of times where I'll start is like, what are those business questions you're trying to answer? Like, don't just capture the data just to capture it, right? So sit down and try to understand, like, what am I trying to get a user to do when they hit the site? What are those events that you want to be tracking and doing with that information? And so if you don't have that question, then you don't need to capture the data necessarily, right? So don't capture it just to capture it. And so I try to approach it as like less is more in a way.
Right.
Number one, it's going to cost you more to set up and all those things, but it also just hones in on those core things that you really care about. So if you can answer those questions, and maybe they're very simple, maybe they're simple, like, I just want to know how many people download this white paper, or whatever. So that could be very simple. But if there are those intermediary things where you're really trying to understand engagement, I helped a client recently where they aren't expecting to get a lot of purchases happening on their site, but they do want to really understand how are people interacting with their products. Like, are they clicking on certain areas, like to view more details about the product? Are they adding it to cart, but maybe not purchasing? Are those kind of things, those kind of mid-tier events that can be very significant and can show engagement? Those are the kind of things you really want to be thinking about, what you want to track and how you want to track it.
Right. And yeah, it's so cool. But so we are technical, we are in the weeds. I mean, we've taken all the UA classes, we've done this stuff, we know what we're doing. GA4, a little bit more new, but we're still technical experts. But some of our clients are not. And I mean, of course, they must have had this conversation multiple times since the switch. But like, what are your suggestions for like educating clients about the differences between UA and GA4? I mean, without getting too technical,
Mm-hmm.
like what do you think is the best way people say, like, just talk to them about the differences? Do they talk about it? I mean, do we just, accept this new reporting overlord, as our savior, or you know what I mean? Like, how do you get people to
Yeah.
thread the old to the new without getting into the technical stuff?
I think you just need to understand how GA4 functions,
Right.
and trying to get to, can you answer the same questions you were trying to answer before? So if there's certain types of reports that you used in Universal Analytics, can you recreate those in GA4? Because that's the first step. It's just understanding, can you get to the same data? And there's different tool out there. Google actually has a pretty good workshop. It's called Skillshop. That goes through a lot of kind of the nuances and how to get set up in GA4 and things like that. So that can be super helpful. Getting into like different workshops. I do some workshops with teams directly.
Mm,
That can be super useful because a lot of it is you can sit and watch a video and it can be kind of sink in a little bit, but a lot of that's like you just need to ask some of those questions and get a little
right.
bit deeper, or how is this relevant to my business or with the data I'm seeing. So I do that quite a bit with folks doing like more workshop kind of trainings
Yeah.
where we do cover a lot of those differences, but also get into the not the technical weeds, but like the reporting weeds of really understanding fundamentally how those two things are different. So, I wouldn't necessarily spend a whole lot of time on doing the comparison, like really, well, you want to understand why they're different, but at a certain point, you got to just be like, all right, this is what it is. You just kind of have to ignore it and know that depending on when you set up GA4, if you set it up 2 months ago, you got a while before you can do any sort of like trending. If you set it up a year ago, you're probably pretty good. You don't have to really worry too much about Universal Analytics and what it was doing before. You can just use GA4 to GA4. So really, it's going to be a time buffer, before folks can really start kind of using the comparison against the two systems
And
or the
here's
same system.
one thing that I was thinking about is that people probably are less inclined to ask open questions in a forum where in which their clients will see that they don't know what they're
Yeah.
talking about.
Right.
You
Right.
know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I would love to
Right.
say, be more upfront with this, and it takes a village, and hey, is anybody else having a problem? But they don't want their clients to see that they're asking this question. So
Yeah.
like, maybe there's some links to not only workshops, but some of those Slack channels that you're talking about. Maybe we can include
Yeah.
that in here so people can
For
just be like,
sure.
here's a safe spot, because we're all having those questions and we just don't feel bold enough to ask them. And maybe we don't have time to get into a workshop, or just like you said, I'll go to a webinar, but it's totally disconnected from what I actually need. Um,
Yes.
I,
Yes.
I I think there's something that Steve's talking about here, is that don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to do some research, and then we have resources that can help you. So we'll provide some
And we're
links
all
to that.
figuring it out, right? Like that's the
And
thing. I
there
mean,
you
there's
go,
so
man.
much of this, like it's new to everybody. And certain people are maybe a little bit farther along, but I'm learning stuff every single day that I didn't know yesterday. Like it's just so new. And you,
And
you mentioned a Slack channel, like Measure Slack. Love it. Like
yeah,
it's so active. There's folks in there that just they're so generous with their time.
yes,
I almost get choked up. Like it's so great because it's actually changed my what I do as a consultant. Like because I can go there, I get stuck on something. I didn't have a place to go. It's very different when you can ask other people. This is like my community, where I can
right.
go and say, I'm stuck on this, please help me, or I'll help. So and I learn by helping too, because I'll go research something or whatever. So Measure Slack can't speak more about it if you're in the agency space or you're in the space of like you really want to understand the technical stuff, or you just have some questions you want to ask, go there. It's fantastic.
Oh my God. We will provide links to that because that's just brilliant. And what an amazing thing to say. And I think that we're sold surety. We sell our clients on surety.
Yeah.
All of our ads are very sure. But behind the scenes, we're trying to stitch it together. We're taking, disparate platforms. We're trying to like get a hold on the data, like we're doing really good work. There are people just like you who have the same thoughts, same concerns, and there's a place that you can talk to them. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it because
Oh, it
what
is. It's
a
great.
great place. I mean, because marketing
Yeah.
is that kind of like everybody can do it. No one talks about it because they want to look like they're on top of it. But
Right.
really, the
Right.
behind the scenes is you're like, an event is a conversion, is an event, is a micro action, is a, oh my God. So yes, we will provide links to that. Okay, just imagine now you're in a train station, you're waiting for a train. You look to your right and there is a harried, just looking really rough and disheveled digital marketer. And she's struggling with GA4. What is your advice to her? Do you have like one piece of advice that you could give?
I would say just keep going with it, right? Like just try to understand the how to function in that space, because there are some really great things. Like the custom reporting inside GA4 is fantastic. Like you
Mm-hmm.
can set up some really great reporting and make it make sense. You just have to get into it a little bit more. And I think part of it is don't be afraid of the newness of it,
Mm.
and start just experimenting, start jumping in there, start looking out for resources.
Mm-hmm.
Do get into some of those, like get into Measure Slack, like follow folks out there that are posting about it. Just even if you're not picking up everything, it's just part of your world a little bit. So you might
Mm.
start paying attention to, hey, this is relevant to me. I want to learn a little bit more about it. So I think the newness of it is always scary for everybody. Like I felt such like an expert in universal analytics, and now I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm supposed
Oh,
to know this. Like I
yes.
just get beyond that. Everybody's feeling that same way.
Mm.
So we just have to kind of keep educating yourself, and it will get more comfortable.
If people want to connect and learn more about you online, how can they do that, Steve?
Probably the best place is on LinkedIn. I try to be relatively active there. It's just whatever, Steve Lamar. I don't know
Yeah.
what we say on LinkedIn, so at Steve Lamar. So yeah, certainly connect with me there. Happy to chat too. I even, if you just got a question here or there, I'm happy to answer those if it's just a one-off. I just got stuck on this. Or get into Measure Slack. Like I said, I'm pretty active there as well. So you have a whole team of folks that would be able to answer questions very, very eagerly too. So.
Cheese or chocolate?
Are you ready?
I am.
Cheese or chocolate?
Chocolate, of course.
It's true. It's true. He loves chocolate. What about UA or GA4? You got to choose one.
Oh, UA. Sorry, UA.
And the whole episode is wrapped up in a bow. Okay, here we go. Fresh spreadsheets or fresh bed sheets?
Oh, spreadsheets. Yeah.
Oh, you love that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just love the data.
I know. My boss is amazing with a spreadsheet. Every time she pulls one up, I'm like, ooh. When you see people who can rock a spreadsheet, it's exciting.
Yeah.
But okay, acquisition or retention?
Oh, I like acquisition. I've always been on the performance marketing side, so yeah, that I don't know, feels more comfortable.
Well,
Let's go acquisition.
I'll let you know marketing science supports your thought. If you want to grow a brand,
Great.
focus
Perfect.
on acquisition, not on retention.
Perfect.
Storytelling or straightforward selling?
Oh, I don't like selling. Yeah, I got to go storytelling. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And finally, the most difficult question. Listen to the music of Barry Manilow forever or Neil Diamond?
I think Barry. Yeah. Just that deep, that'll just kind of keep me going longer. Yeah, for sure.
I love it. Great choice. It was the right choice. I'll just let you know.
Good. I'm glad I passed.
What Gets Measured is a Ninja Cat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.